Epstein Experience by Voidzilla. Now, I'm not sure if Voidzilla covered the rape inquiry, and I find it very interesting, everybody who talks about Epstein files constantly but never covered the rape inquiry. But I still respect CoffeeZilla's words a lot. He made a new video about Epstein.
To the Epstein Experience featuring JD Vance. The vice president has gone on the world's largest podcast to slip us some propaganda. They're hoping you won't notice. Because the cover-up, that was 6 months ago. Now, the rewrite has started. I hope you've forgotten some of those details because you're going to need to misremember everything in the Epstein files in order to believe what they're trying to sell us.
I did hear that JD Vance made a complete ass out of himself recently. That's the worst thing, is that Trump's term in our office has been so good, except the handling of the Epstein files. It should have been completely decensored and fully released to the public. Every single bit of it. Every single bit of it.
Got to be careful of the podcast these days. The times have changed. It's no longer bros talking. All these powerful people who used to go try to spin stuff on cable TV have now realized this is the new place to sell your propaganda. It's not on cable TV. Nobody's there. It's on the Joe Rogan Experience. You got to be skeptical of all these guys who go on the show. I mean, except that guy, obviously. Wait, click off that. Some of these guys you could trust. Some of them, you know, they just have the right look to them. I think you could trust them. But today I just want to break down all the claims made regarding the Epstein files, starting with what I thought was the most egregious one, and that essentially explains why they're really talking about this. What their new line of attack is on the Epstein files. They didn't cover it up. They just mishandled the comms.
I say this with all candor, like, we absolutely screwed up the comms of the Epstein files. Like we just did. But do I think the reason we screwed up the comms is because we were trying to hide something? No.
How convenient. They didn't cover it up, obstruct, lie about what was in the Epstein files until they were forced by the Senate and House of Representatives in order to release it. No. They just screwed up the comms. They just didn't know how to roll that out.
Again, well, it's obvious that Epstein was a sick man.
Yes.
I mean, I think what JD Vance said was actually pretty fair there. They were the first people to actually acknowledge that they exist. And they did publish them, but they did just release them overly censored. So what was really the point? It was still a step in the right direction. So I do agree the comms were pretty fucking biffed for that. Just being completely fair here. It's a hell of a lot better than Obama did.
But if people want to say...
And by the way, the Epstein files made Trump look better because they confirmed that Trump was one of the first whistleblowers on Jeffrey Epstein, even though everybody was calling him a child rapist. So being completely fair here, I can actually agree with JD Vance that they did biff the comms. They could have done it a lot better.
We mishandled the Epstein release. Guilty.
Oh, that's fine. You can say we mishandled it.
Sure.
Did we do it on purpose? No, not at all.
We did mishandle, especially the communications of it.
What do you think should have been done?
I think that we should have just dropped everything at the very beginning. And like, obviously it takes a little time to review the stuff, to find the stuff, to redact things where you have victims and so forth. But we should have just done it as quickly as possible.
Oh, you mean like the thing
I mean, I think that's absolutely fair.
you all ran on? That didn't occur to you to do it? There was no other reason that you guys hid it for months and months? Like, I don't even know who believes this, except for people who just take this stuff at face value. But I want to show you definitively, you should not take the vice president at face value. JD Vance.
Okay, sure. I will say what JD Vance said, he should have just released it completely unredacted. I guess it wouldn't be possible because that could bring more attention to the victims. But the problem was so much more than that was redacted. So they are using a little bit of colorful language and they're not really acknowledging that everything was overly censored.
In this interview, admits to things that tells you that he is a propagandist. He's not just a guy talking about his true beliefs on an issue. And the way we know this is because of how he talks about Iran, where specifically when asked about his real opinion, he says, look, I'm not a commentator. He's just here to execute for the president.
I mean, my attitude towards this man, as you know, is the vice president, I'm not a public commentator. Like, my job is to give the best advice I can to the President of the United States. But once the president makes a decision, my attitude towards it is I try to make it as successful as possible.
So that's what he's doing here with the Epstein files. Look, they covered it up. They made that decision. And now JD Vance is here to try to make it sound as palatable as possible to you, the viewer. And it's not just JD Vance that says this. The New York Times has actual reporting on Inside the White House freakout of the Epstein files. JD Vance is literally quoted in that piece talking about the Epstein files, saying this is a huge problem. When talking...
I'm very confused here. Hold up. So Trump initially released or resisted the release. As president in 2025, he and his administration, including the Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's since been released, thank God, opposed trying to block bipartisan congressional efforts to force full disclosure of the Justice Department files on Jeffrey Epstein. This included warnings to Republicans. Congress forced the issue. Why was Trump forced to release the Epstein files, but Joe Biden wasn't? I'm actually very curious about this. This guy is such a... I feel like he's very enraged about this. Trump was forced by a specific law passed by Congress. Biden faced no such law and operated under standard legal barriers during an active case. No compelling legislation under Biden.
Talking about the president and Epstein's relationship, there was some reporting that was coming out. JD Vance was trying to think of gambits to try to get people off the scent. Quote, he thought that the White House should enlist Tucker Carlson to interview Epstein's longtime girlfriend and co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell in prison.
Jesus.
It might help the president if Maxwell was willing to state that Trump had not been a part of wrongdoing with Epstein. Well, by the way, that happened, but just with Todd Blanche, not Tucker Carlson. So we literally know internally, JD was saying, hey, this is a huge problem. Hey.
So here's just the thing, though, is that the Epstein files made Democrats look way worse than Republicans, and it completely exonerated Donald Trump. Whereas videos about Biden and Obama not releasing the Epstein files, that's what I'm saying. And also, did he cover the rape inquiry at all? He talked about the Legos, the president's stock trades, the government says you're scamming too much. I don't understand why he would cover the Epstein files with such visceral hatred, but wouldn't cover the rape inquiry at all.
Hey, we got to deal with this. We got to, maybe get Tucker Carlson to interview Ghislaine Maxwell. We got to find a way to convince the public that this is no big deal, right? He's literally part of the cover-up. Then he goes on the Joe Rogan Experience to do his spin move, right? Now, if you're wondering, well, how can we trust that New York Times reporting, right?
I'm not really familiar with CoffeeZilla's political beliefs at all. I don't want to completely just dismiss him as Trump derangement syndrome, but I am just trying to hear him out here.
Well, actually, JD Vance quotes it. This was during a section where JD Vance, the I'm not a commentator guy, was trying to establish his bona fides with Joe Rogan's audience. He goes, hey, look, I'm a conspiracy theorist too. And he quotes the article.
You and I could literally do 2 episodes about this. I've gone on down to every rabbit hole. There's this funny New York Times story that's somewhat true, somewhat false, but where Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, says, well, we know JD's a conspiracy theorist on this. Like I am, actually. I've gone down every rabbit hole here.
So JD Vance says, hey, look, guys, hey, I'm just like you. I may not be a commentator. I may be here to just play spin, but I'm like, I've been down every rabbit hole. Nothing to see here, guys. We just mishandled the comms. But if you look at it, that's just a direct quote from the New York Times article. Now, of course, yes, JD's.
I feel like we're reading way too heavily into this. Am I crazy? I feel like we're really approaching this with the worst faith interpretation ever. Like, we are really drilling into this with some pretty, in my opinion, harmless statements so far. I don't know, bro. Like, this seems a little bit intense.
Says, oh, yeah, some of it's true, some of it's false.
Somewhat true, somewhat false.
But which part? You're quoted in there covering the thing up. Was that the part that's fake? The part which says you're a real conspiracy theorist like the rest of us? Oh, no. That's true. Everything else where you were involved in a cover-up involving the White House, where you were directly floating ideas to go interview Epstein's co-conspirator, not to get to the truth, but in order to exonerate the president, that's all probably fake. That's all probably nonsense. But it gets even worse, because one of the things JD talks about is how he's thought a lot about how to discredit conspiracy theories. Watch.
One of the ways you discredit a conspiracy theory, I've thought about this a lot, is to try to hide it. Another way you discredit conspiracy theory is by flooding the zone.
Did you guys just hear that? He goes, I've thought a lot about it. One of the ways to discredit a conspiracy theory is to try to hide it. They did that. Yeah. They actually did that. They told us, hey, there's no evidence to predicate an investigation against any uncharged third parties. We looked at all the documents. Nothing to see here, guys. We're not going to release it. And then the second way is to flood the zone, which is you just throw so much unsubstantiated stuff out here, you discredit the conspiracy theory entirely.
Another way you discredit conspiracy theory is by flooding the zone. So one of the things I've tried to do when looking at all this stuff is to try to understand sort of where it fits in and to, try to separate the real from the fake.
Now, is that what they did next? Well, actually, yes, it is. The way they released the files was in this giant dump of millions of documents. Not only that, Vance, in the New York Times article, he says is...
I feel like it's very disingenuous to claim that JD Vance and Trump were flooding the gates with the Epstein files by releasing all of them at the exact same time. But it's like, if those are the totality of the files, it's not like they were creating fake files. You know what I'm saying? I feel like he's going way too hard on this.
Somewhat true, somewhat false, says unsubstantiated allegations.
And also, yeah, Congress forced them to fully release everything, which they didn't do for Biden either.
And anecdotes about Trump should go out, Vance argued.
Yeah, that's also what everybody wanted. Everybody wanted all of the Epstein files. The problem was they fucked it up and they didn't release them fully uncensored.
They were going to surface regardless, and if the administration published first, it would demonstrate good faith and take the oxygen out of conspiracy theories. Guys, he literally tried to do the thing he's telling you on Joe conspiracy theories.
Even the unsubstantiated allegation and anecdotes about Trump should go out, Vance argued. They were going to surface regardless, and if the administration published them first, it would demonstrate good faith and take the oxygen out of the conspiracy theories. Sure, that's a completely fair statement. This is a completely fair statement.
Published first, it would demonstrate good faith and take the oxygen out of conspiracy theories. Guys, he literally tried to do the thing he's telling you on Joe Rogan. Oh, I've thought a lot about this. This is how you discredit a conspiracy theory. You release a bunch of unsubstantiated stuff.
I feel like being informed on how to do something doesn't mean that that immediately proves that you are taking part in that something. That kind of feels like, well, if you play a lot of video games, that means that if you play a lot of violent video games, that too makes you violent. Just being informed on how to do something doesn't mean that you're directly doing that. I feel like if you are a conspiracy theorist, you do think a lot about how to discredit them or how to prove them. I feel like we're making a lot of leaps here.
So they don't pay attention to the stuff that is substantiated. And this is my problem with these types of interviews. Look, I don't think there's anything wrong with interviewing the vice president, but you have to take into account that he's not just a bro. He's not just your buddy, right? This is a guy who tells you he's not here to commentate. He's not here to give his real opinion. He's here to propagandize for what the president's agenda is. Here's a guy who says he's thought a lot about discrediting conspiracy theories.
One of the ways you discredit a conspiracy theory, I thought about this a lot.
Yeah, we're okay.
Here's a guy who corroborates reporting where he is directly conspiring to discredit the Epstein conspiracy theory. But, oh, we'll just let him get away with...
I don't think he said that at all. If anything, he said that they should release the Epstein files because it would exonerate the conspiracy theorists who believe that Donald Trump is a child rapist, which did exactly that because everybody was saying the Epstein files was going to showcase Donald Trump raping children, and it did the exact opposite. In fact, it showed that I believe Donald Trump was the fourth whistleblower very early on in the investigation of Jeffrey Epstein.
Saying he's just like one of us, bro. He's gone down every rabbit hole.
I'm like one of the OG Epstein conspiracy theorists. I've probably gone down every single rabbit hole we could go down.
Yeah, we are replaying the same clip over and over and over again.
Most of them today.
And so look, with that out of the way, I just want to debunk some of the specific claims that JD Vance made. One, he tried to say, hey, look, the real problem was all with Alec Acosta back in 2007, 2008 with the prosecution.
Look, the original sin of the Epstein investigation, and obviously I'm biased here, but it was not what Donald Trump and the administration did in 2025. It was, you have to go back to 2007, 2008. The original Alex Acosta investigation of Jeffrey Epstein, where he basically dropped the federal charges. I think Epstein ended up getting prosecuted on some sort of local thing. But the original warrant, the original warrant back in 2008, what was he looking for? What was he allowed to look for? What were they collecting? It was not looking at a broader conspiracy. So that happens, okay? Epstein gets pinched. I think he goes to prison, or maybe this is when he was on house arrest. But like anything that existed from the 80s and 90s up to 2006, 2007, anything that existed that we didn't get back then was disappeared, right? So like when people say, has what you've seen on the inside make you think that that Epstein never blackmailed people or that Epstein never engaged in broader trafficking? No, absolutely not. What I have seen, and I've looked at most of the files, is that there just wasn't dispositive evidence. And if that dispositive evidence ever existed, it was probably destroyed after 2006, 2007.
JD, I gotta give him credit. He's so good at this because some of what he's saying is like half true. Alex Costa did mess up the investigation. There was a completely ridiculous plea deal done, a sweetheart deal, and there wasn't enough evidence collected. That's
Let's pull this up. So Alexander Alex Acosta, as a U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida, 2005 through 2009, oversaw, approved, and controversial 2007-2008 non-prosecution agreement, NPA, with financier Jeffrey Epstein. This deal is widely known as the sweetheart deal due to its leniency despite evidence of Epstein abusing dozens of underage girls. Okay, so it seems like, yeah, they absolutely did fuck this the hell up. And once you catch somebody once, if you don't execute it right then and there, there's a lot higher opportunity for cover-up. So I still feel like JD Vance is being pretty fair here. Once again, I'm not a JD Vance guy. Marco Rubio is much more my cup of tea. But JD Vance, I do like his policies on how much he believes in AI. But I'm not like a big oh, I love JD Vance. But I feel like he's being pretty fair here. And I feel like CoffeeZilla's really reaching in this video.
all true. But here's the big lie. There was enough, and still is enough, in the Epstein files to predicate an investigation into uncharged third parties. There just absolutely is. There is evidence of a guy still at large that is talking about bringing girls over from Eastern Europe very clearly in order to traffic them. There are powerful people mentioned in these files where we don't have those people's records, right? Because he's saying, oh, we don't have enough from Epstein stuff. Well, has it ever occurred to you guys that you could investigate other people? But that's not happening because that's not the goal here. The goal has been, and we saw it in the New York Times reporting, which JD Vance corroborated, was to bury this story as quickly as possible and move on. Meanwhile, they throw up their hands and they go, oh, we just don't have enough evidence, to lock anybody up today. He doesn't explain why they can't go start investigations tomorrow. It's kind of incredible to think in hindsight that in 2019, the government, specifically the FBI, had 10 co-conspirators they were investigating, and now we have none. And this brings me to my last point, which is about some of the victims who were not interviewed for all of this. One of the big revelations towards the end of the Epstein release was the fact that the DOJ has not met with many of the people who were trafficked to Epstein. That's something you would think would be the first stop if you're trying to get to the bottom of something like this, rather than interviewing Ghislaine Maxwell and then cutting her a sweetheart deal to move her to a nice minimum security prison.
Todd Blanche has never attempted to listen to us, the crime victims, survivors.
I also agree. Ghislaine Maxwell should have been executed on the spot as a co-conspirator with Jeffrey Epstein, absolutely.
In this room repeatedly asked to meet
Jeffrey Epstein also should have been publicly hung.
with Todd Blanche through multiple channels. He never responded. Yesterday, he said he would meet with us, with our attorneys, if they were present. But let's be clear, that was the first time that was ever communicated to us before yesterday.
Yeah, Todd Blanche is the top of the DOJ right now. He's like the guy who technically is in charge of all of this. According to that woman, Todd Blanche only recently said he would even be willing to meet with the victims, and that was because he was very directly asked about this, where he couldn't really get out of it.
I have never said I will not meet with survivors.
Will you meet with these 10 survivors? I'm asking you on the record.
If they have lawyers, as you know, I'm prohibited from meeting directly with them. I have met with counsel for survivors, as has many people in the Department of Justice, over 30. But if they are represented by counsel, we will work with their counsel. If they don't have a lawyer, I will certainly make arrangements to make sure the right people at the Department of Justice meet with them. Absolutely.
Will you get it done within the next 30 days that each
I
of
will
these
get it done
survivors...
today.
What do you mean today? We're talking 2026, bro. We've been talking about the Epstein files for literally years now, and as the lead guy, you didn't think of this? It's only when you're being pushed to meet with survivors that would even occur to you that they might have information on the people who committed these awful acts against them. I mean,
I think that's absolutely fair. I think that's actually a very fair point he's making. There is a lot of what seems to be intentional negligence of the proper handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files. I think this is a very fair point he's made. I think the majority of this going on Vance was reaching, but I agree. I mean, and I think we all agree that Trump's term has been very good, but the handling of the Epstein files has been an absolute fucking mess.
never occurred to somebody. I just don't believe it.
And that is also very true that there are these people where this issue's been going on since the 90s, yet they blame Trump for the entirety of what Jeffrey Epstein did, when in reality, I mean, he wasn't even in office back then. I think a lot of this is being blamed on Trump, when in reality, I mean, it's a complete fail of our justice system in totality.
And that's the thing, when you actually hear some of these survivors talk, a lot of them will say that it's been a pattern of not investigating.
Jess, why do you think it was so hard for him to just say, yes, I will? Especially given the fact that we know Todd Blanche flew down to Florida and met with Ghislaine Maxwell, of all people, in person.
One of the tactics we've seen is avoiding investigation. So, for example, I gave leads back in 2019 for two people to follow, one that had been in Jeffrey Epstein's orbit for over 18 years, and one that could corroborate that she also knew this same person. And I know directly that those leads were never followed.
I mean, isn't this insane? We have it from the actual survivors, who, by the way, in some of these cases, the only reason they're public now is because they were doxxed by the DOJ. And so now they're like, well, screw it. I've had my story made public forcibly, so now I'm going to have to just go public.
Well, why are we guilting the DOJ for doxing these people? But at the same time, we also say these things were over-censored. Like, there was over 3 million fucking files, you know what I mean? It's like, do we want these things fully uncensored, or do we not? Are we going to be understanding that it takes time to censor, or are we not? Are we going to understand that mistakes can happen, or are we not? You know what I fucking mean? Like, yeah, I mean, this is why the Epstein files had to be treated with such, what's the word I'm looking for? This is why we had to be so careful with the release of the Epstein, was because the livelihood of the victims who are still alive and here today could be put at risk if things weren't properly censored. But the problem is, in that path, we ended up over-censoring, and we can't be happy with that either. That's the problem, man. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like, how it's like, do it perfectly or you're a fucking loser. I'm just glad progress was made. I'm glad they were released. I'm glad we can see where they fucked up, and we can critique that and move forward with that. There will always be errors, especially something that grand and scale. True. I get what you're saying, but how come it's mostly the victims who have been doxxed and barely any perpetrators? It's a very good point. So it says, there is no definitive public count of perpetrators in the Epstein files, specifically doxxed and identified. 2024 court on sealing, Godfrey versus Maxwell defamation case. 150 to 118 names. All of a sudden, it's 170 John Jane Does from dispositions, motions. Many were already known prior to reporting of Maxwell's trial. 43 victims had their full names unredacted, i.e. doxxed, in the major 2026 DOJ Epstein files. You know, the worst thing is, I bet if these victims' names weren't doxxed, they would also complain about, like, well, then how do we know if these people really exist? Let's look up even more. How many files were there in the Epstein files? I'm actually curious what the number was. Copy acting like he just wants the truth and is being objective while slamming the guy who's been in the position literally 2 months. Fucking insane. The Epstein files, Department of Justice, total nearly 3.5 million pages. Holy fuck. And the majority of way people got information from the Epstein files was by slapping them into AI.
But all of these things just point to one direction. We have buried this story repeatedly, and the vice president, coincidentally, is going on the world's #1 podcast to try to pretend that is not the case, that they did all they could, but if only Alex Acosta would have done more back in 2007. Now they just can't do that.
I mean, I feel like that's a very fair point to make. I mean, Alex Acosta did absolutely biff it back in 2008. We've already seen that with proof. Obviously, that is the case, and they did release the Epstein files, which, by the way, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not, this is the most that has ever been done for this case in history. Nobody else has done more for this case than what has currently been done. But once again, I agree, the over-censoring of the documents was insane. But then again, there was 3.5 million pages.
Their job because their hands are tied. So yeah, basically the way I see it, there are two sides in this story. One side actually experienced these awful acts and is telling us that our government has not been investigating these crimes fully. And the other side has told you that they're not a real commentator. They're here to just spin the narrative. They have told you they've thought a lot about how to discredit conspiracy theories, and they have half verified, half denied a report that has them conspiring to do all the things. So yeah, I think this was a pretty obvious one, but I wanted to talk about it anyways to counteract some of this ridiculous propaganda.
I don't really think there's that much propaganda going on. I feel like JD Vance's speech on that and take on that was completely fine. Maybe I'm missing out on it. But then again, CoffeeZilla didn't even cover the BBC from rape inquiry in the UK. So maybe he's deranged, but I feel like he was really reaching. He made some fair points. I will admit, he made some very fair points about like, well, why didn't we do this or why didn't we do that towards the later end of the video? But I feel like JD Vance's statement was fine, and we're really fucking reaching here. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I'm wrong. I'm totally cool with it. But that's just my take so far.